My name is Caleb Ainsworth. I was 22 years old, and I had $73 to my name. That's it. $73. A dead pickup truck on the side of Highway 9. A folded handkerchief in my pocket with a faded rose embroidered on it. The only thing my grandmother left me before she died when I was 8. After she was gone, I was passed around the system. Garbage bags for luggage. Nobody saying my name like it mattered. I had no plan that morning, no destination. I was just walking toward whatever came next. The way you walk when you've run out of options, and the road is the only thing still moving. That's when I stumbled into a county auction in a town I'd never heard of, and that's when I bought it. For $15 cash, I bought a half-acre of weeds and a collapsed water tower nobody else wanted. The crowd laughed. The auctioneer shook his head. A woman behind the counter looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't know it yet, but my grandmother's name was buried under that rubble. Her photographs, her journal, a secret she'd hidden 50 years before I was born. And the people who destroyed her life were still living 3 streets away. This is how I found my way home. My name is Caleb Ainsworth. I was 22 years old, and I had $73 to my name. That was the number. 73. I'd counted it 3 times that morning in the cab of my truck. Once when I woke up. Once after I bought a gas station coffee. Once when I realized the coffee was the most expensive thing I'd consumed in 4 days. The truck died around 10 in the morning. Not slowly, not with warning. It just gave up. 1 minute the engine was humming. The next it sounded like someone shaking a coffee can full of bolts. And then nothing. I coasted to the shoulder of Highway 9. Indiana corn country. Late September. The kind of sky that's too blue, to be honest, about how cold the wind is. I sat there for a long time. Hands on the wheel. Engine ticking as it cooled. Because what do you do? When you have no phone, no tow money, no address, no one to call, you sit, then you get out. I pulled my duffel bag from the passenger seat. Everything I owned fit in that bag. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a jacket that wasn't warm enough for what was coming, a toothbrush, a photograph of my grandmother holding me when I was 4, and the handkerchief. The handkerchief was folded into a small square in my back pocket. White cotton. A rose embroidered in the corner, pink thread, slightly faded. My grandmother Eleanor had stitched it herself, sitting in her recliner when I was 7 years old, humming a song I never learned the name of. It was the only thing of hers I had left. I locked the truck, out of habit. There was nothing in it worth stealing, but you lock things anyway. Because if you stop locking things, you stop believing you'll come back for them. The sign at the next mile marker said, Briar Hollow. 2 miles. I'd never heard of it. I started walking. You learn things about yourself when you walk a highway alone. You learn that 2 miles is longer when you're hungry than when you're not. You learn that pickup trucks slow down sometimes, the driver's looking at you, and then they speed up again. You learn that a folded handkerchief in your back pocket can feel heavier than it should, because it's the only thing keeping you tethered to a person who isn't here anymore. My grandmother died when I was 8. I won't tell you all of it, not yet, but I'll tell you this. She was the only person who ever called me sweet boy without it sounding like a lie. She raised me from the day my father died, a car accident on a highway like this one, 3 states over, until the day her heart gave out in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and apple juice. After that, the system. I aged out at 18. Got a job at a tire shop, got fired, got a job at a warehouse. Got laid off, got a truck for $900, and figured I'd drive somewhere new and start over. I was very good at starting over. I had practiced it many times. I was not, it turned out, very good at staying. Briar Hollow appeared the way small towns do. A water tower in the distance, wait. No, that was a grain silo, a church steeple, a speed limit sign that dropped from 55 to 30 without warning. Then houses. Then a main street. 4 blocks, maybe 5. A diner with hand-painted letters on the window. Mabel's. The smell of bacon rolled out the door and hit me in the chest like a fist. I almost cried right there on the sidewalk. I hadn't smelled bacon in 3 weeks. A barber shop. Closed. A post office. Closed. A hardware store with a sign in the window that said, Open. And at the end of Main Street, behind the courthouse, a gravel lot full of pickup trucks and folding chairs. A man on a flatbed trailer was holding a clipboard and a microphone. A crowd of maybe 40 people. Farmers, mostly. A few women in folding chairs with cold drinks in their hands. A teenager, on a bicycle, watching from the edge. I drifted closer, because watching was free, and I had nowhere else to be. Lot 11, the men were saying. John Deere, riding mower. Runs on a good day. Starting bid, $40. A county surplus auction. I'd seen one of these once before, in another town, in another life. Cities and counties cleaning out the stuff they didn't want anymore. Old vehicles, foreclosed property, equipment that had outlived its usefulness. Lot 11, sold for $50. Lot 12 was a shipping container, sold for $90. Lot 13 was a box truck with a bad transmission, $200. Lot 14. The auctioneer's voice changed. Just a little. The corner of his mouth went up. Lot 14, he said. Half-acre of land, east side of town. Formerly the site of the municipal water tower. Tower collapsed in the windstorm of 2018. Parcel includes the foundation, all remaining debris, and any wildlife that's moved in since. The crowd laughed. Starting bid, the auctioneer said. $15. Nobody moved. Come on, folks. $15. You spend more than that on lunch. Nothing. A woman in the second row leaned over to her husband and shook her head. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Going once. Going. 15, I said. Every head turned. I felt the stares before I understood what I'd done. 40 people. 40 pairs of eyes. A young man with dirty jeans and a duffel bag and 3 weeks of stubble, bidding on a pile of rubble. The auctioneer blinked. We have 15, he said carefully. Do I hear 20? Silence. 20? Anyone? Silence. The gavel came down. Sold. Lot 14 to the young man in the back. See the clerk for paperwork. A woman near the front turned to a friend and whispered something. The friend covered her mouth. I didn't care. I walked toward the table, where a woman in her 60s was sitting with a stack of folders. Silver-rimmed glasses on a chain around her neck. Her hair was the color of dried wheat, pinned up in a bun that had been pinned up 1,000 times before. I handed her $15 in singles, and one wrinkled 5. She didn't take the money right away. She looked at me. Just looked. The way someone looks when they're trying to place a face they used to know. Your name, please, she said. Caleb Ainsworth. Her hand stopped halfway to the cash box. For a second, half a second, maybe less, her face did something I couldn't read. Then it smoothed over. Professional. Polite. The face of a woman who has spent 50 years in a small town and knows how to keep her expression flat when she needs to. Ainsworth, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. She wrote it on the deed, slowly, as if she was making sure she spelled it right. My name is Margaret, she said. I'm the county clerk. Sign here and here and here. I signed. She handed me the deed, folded twice. 3 pages, stapled. East on Maple, she said. Past the old grain elevator. Right on Tower Road. You can't miss it. She paused. Well, you can't miss what's left of it. I thanked her. I turned to go. Mr. Ainsworth. I stopped. She was still looking at me, her hands flat on the table. Her glasses had slid down a little on her nose. Be careful out there, she said. And welcome to Briar Hollow. She said it like she meant something else. I didn't ask what. I walked out into the sun with the deed in my hand. I owned half an acre. I had $58 left. I was, in every way that mattered, still homeless. But the deed had my name on it. Caleb Ainsworth. And I hadn't seen my name written on anything official in a long time. The walk out to the lot took 20 minutes. Past the grain elevator, the way Margaret said. A right on Tower Road. A dirt road that hadn't been graded in maybe a decade. Weeds growing up between the tire tracks. And then I saw it. A half-acre of nothing, surrounded by a chain-link fence with one corner collapsed. The gate hung open on a single hinge, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside the fence, a sea of weeds, broken glass, beer cans bleached white by the sun. And in the middle, like the bones of some huge dead animal. The water tower, what was left of it. The cylindrical tank had split open and lay on its side, half buried in dirt. Steel beams jutted up at strange angles, concrete chunks the size of small cars, a tangle of rebar reaching out of the ground like fingers. It looked exactly like what the auctioneer had said. Rubble, but the ground was flat. The fence offered some privacy, and near the north edge, against a chunk of standing concrete that must have been part of the original foundation wall, there was a spot where I could stretch a tarp and call it shelter. I climbed through the gate, set down my duffel. I stood in the middle of my half-acre and looked at the sky. Mine. The word felt strange in my mouth. I'd never owned anything before. Not really. The truck had a title, but the title had a lien on it from the dealer who sold it to me. The clothes in my bag, sure. But clothes don't count. This was different. This was land. This was dirt I could stand on. And nobody could tell me to leave. I should have been excited. I tried to feel excited. But what I felt instead was something quieter, a sense of being watched. I turned slowly. That's when I heard it. A sound from inside the split water tank. A low, hoarse whimper. I froze. Then I picked up a length of rebar from the dirt, about 3 feet long, rusted, heavy enough to do damage if I needed it to, and walked toward the opening in the tank. "Hello?" I called. The whimper came again, softer this time. I crouched at the edge of the split. The last of the daylight slanted through the gap, and in the back corner, curled against the inner curve of the steel, was a dog, a cocker spaniel, or what had been one, before life had its way. Pale yellow fur, matted with dirt, one ear torn, ribs showing, a front paw held up at an angle that wasn't right. I could tell from where I was crouched that she was staring at me with eyes the color of wet caramel. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. I set the rebar down. "Hey," I said, softly. "Hey, sweet girl." She didn't move. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out the half sandwich I'd been saving from the gas station. Turkey on stale bread. I unwrapped it, set it on the ground inside the tank about 5 feet from her. Then I backed away. She waited. For a long time, she waited. Then she stood. Slow. Stiff. The injured paw lifted carefully off the ground. She limped forward. 3 steps. She bent her head. She ate the sandwich in 4 bites without taking her eyes off me. "You live here," I said. Her tail moved once. A single small wag. I sat down on a slab of broken concrete just outside the tank. "Me too, I guess." I named her Honey. Not right then. Later that night, when she crept out of the tank and lay down 10 feet from where I'd spread my tarp, the color of her fur in the moonlight. The color of the only good thing in my grandmother's pantry when I was a child. Honey on toast. Honey and tea. Honey from a glass jar with a sticky lid. It just fit. The stars came out. I lay on the hard ground with my jacket folded under my head. I'd never seen stars like that. In the city, you don't. Streetlights drown them. In the foster placements, I'd been in apartments and trailers, and one trailer next to a Walmart that had a parking lot lit up so bright you could read by it at midnight. But out here, the sky was a black bowl full of glass and salt. Honey inched closer in the night. I didn't tell her to. By the time I fell asleep, she was lying against my side, her warm body shaking slightly in the cold. I dreamed of my grandmother. I dreamed she was sitting in her recliner with the rose-embroidered handkerchief in her lap, and she was looking right at me, and she was about to tell me something important. And then I woke up. It was 4 in the morning. The stars had moved. I lay there in the dark and reached into my back pocket and pulled out the handkerchief and held it against my face. It smelled like dust now, not like her anymore. It had been a long time since it smelled like her, but the rose was still there. The pink thread, slightly faded, stitched by her hands when she was alive. I held it until the sun came up. The first 3 days were about survival. I'll spare you most of it. There isn't much to tell. I found a public restroom behind the courthouse that was unlocked during business hours. I filled empty water bottles at the sink. I bought a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter at a gas station on the edge of town. I ate small. I worked. Because work was the one thing I knew how to do. My grandmother had taught me that when everything else falls apart, sweet boy, you use your hands. I started clearing rubble by hand because I didn't have a wheelbarrow, because I didn't have gloves, because I didn't have anything. I dragged steel beams to the fence line and stacked them. I broke smaller pieces of concrete apart with a length of rebar and threw them into a pile by the gate. I pulled weeds out of the cracks of the foundation and tossed them aside. My hands bled. I wrapped them in pieces of my old t-shirt and kept working. Honey followed me, limping, watching. Sometimes she'd lie down in a patch of sun and just stare at me, like she couldn't figure out what I was doing. I couldn't really figure it out either, but it felt good to move, to lift, to make a thing better than I'd found it. That was new. On the morning of the fourth day, that's when I saw it. I was kneeling near the southeast corner of the foundation, prying weeds out of a crack with my fingers, when the side of my hand hit something flat and hard. Not concrete, brick. I brushed the dirt away. A single red brick, set into the foundation. Different from the rest of the surface, the rest was poured concrete, grey and pebbled. This was a fired brick, deep red, set deliberately, like a cornerstone. There was something carved into it, faint, worn down by 50 years of weather, but still readable. I leaned closer. I brushed more dirt away. Ainsworth Sisters, 1974. I sat back on my heels. I read it again. I read it a third time. Ainsworth, my name, my grandmother's name. There are moments in your life when the ground tilts, not metaphorically, actually tilts. The whole earth becomes a thing that is no longer flat, and you have to put your hand down to keep from sliding off of it. This was one of those moments. Honey came over. She put her head on my knee. "Honey," I said. My voice was very small. "Honey, look." She looked. She did not understand, but she stayed. I sat there in the dirt next to a brick that had my name on it. A brick that had been set into the foundation of a water tower 50 years before I was born. By a sister, by multiple sisters. Ainsworth sisters. Plural. My grandmother had a sister? My grandmother had sisters? I knew nothing about her family. Nothing. She had raised me alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a city 600 miles from here. She had never mentioned a sister, never mentioned Indiana, never mentioned a town called Briar Hollow. Why? Why didn't she tell me? What happened here? I pressed my palm flat against the brick. The carved letters bit into my skin. I had bought this land for $15, but the land, it turned out, had been waiting for me. The morning after I found the brick, a pickup truck pulled up to the gate. A woman climbed out, maybe 68. Silver hair, cut short and practical. Hands that had clearly spent a lifetime gripping tools. She wore a canvas apron over a flannel shirt, and she carried a gallon jug of water and a pair of leather work gloves. I stood up. I'd been kneeling by the brick again. I'd been kneeling by the brick a lot. "You the one who bought this lot?" It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. "That's me, Hollis Caldwell. I own the hardware store on Main." She held out the water. "Thought you might need this. You've been out here 4 days with no running water. People notice." I took the jug. "Thank you, ma'am." Hollis. Hollis." She looked past me, at the cleared rubble, at the stacked beams, at the foundation, slowly emerging from 50 years of weeds and broken glass. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You're doing all this by hand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Hollis." "With what?" I held up my fingers. The t-shirt strips were dark with old blood. She closed her eyes for a second. Just a second. Then opened them and held out the gloves. "Take these." "I can't pay." "I didn't ask you to pay. I have a whole store full of them. Take the gloves, son." I took them. She didn't leave right away. She stood at the edge of the foundation, hands on her hips, looking at the work I'd done. Honey came up and sniffed her boots. Honey didn't usually go near anyone. But she went up to Hollis, like they'd known each other a long time. "What's your name?" Hollis asked. I didn't catch it at the auction. "Caleb." "Caleb what?" I hesitated. I don't know why I hesitated. I'd given Margaret the clerk my name without thinking, but standing in front of Hollis, with the brick still half uncovered behind me, with Honey watching us both, something told me to wait. But she'd waited long enough. "Ainsworth," I said. Hollis Coldwell went very still. Her hand came up to her chest, not dramatically, just slowly, as if she'd felt a small pain there and was checking on it. She looked at me. She looked at me for a long time. "Caleb Ainsworth," she said. "Yes, ma'am. And your grandmother?" I blinked. How did you? What was her name? Your grandmother? Eleanor. Hollis turned her face away. I watched her watch the horizon for what felt like a full minute. The wind moved through the weeds at the edge of the lot. Honey sat down between us and waited. When Hollis turned back, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I think you'd better come down to the store with me," she said. "After you eat something. I have something I want to show you." "What is it?" She shook her head. "Not here. Not standing in this dirt." She paused. "Eat. Wash your hands. Then come find me. The store's the green one on Main with the broken sign that says Old Wells Hardware because the C fell off in '99 and I never fixed it." She walked back to her truck. She stopped with her hand on the door. "Caleb." "Yes. Your grandmother was one of the finest women this town ever knew, and we did not deserve her." She got in the truck. She drove away. I stood there in the dirt for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't eat. I just looked at the place where Hollis Caldwell's truck had been, and then I looked at the brick, and then I looked at my hands. My grandmother, one of the finest women this town ever knew, and we did not deserve her. What did that mean? What did any of it mean? I sat down on the foundation. Honey climbed into my lap, which she'd never done before. She put her head against my chest. I think she could hear my heart. I think it was probably loud enough for both of us. I pulled the handkerchief out of my back pocket. The rose. The pink thread. I closed my hand around it. My grandmother had her whole life before me, and she kept it a secret. Why? Why didn't you tell me, Eleanor? What were you protecting me from? I didn't know, but I was going to find out. I stood up. I brushed the dirt off my jeans. I went to my tarp and pulled out the cleanest shirt I had, which wasn't very clean. I poured some of Hollis's water into a cup and washed my face. I rubbed my teeth with my finger because my toothbrush had broken 2 days before. I looked at Honey. "You want to come?" She wagged her tail. "Once." We started walking. Hollis's store was exactly where she said it was. The sign read, Old Wells Hardware. The missing C was outlined in faded paint, a ghost of itself. I pushed the door open. A small bell jingled. The store smelled like cut wood and machine oil, and the kind of dust that settles in a place that's been in business for 50 years. Aisles of nails, coils of rope, a rack of work gloves, like the ones in my pocket. Hollis was at the back counter. She looked up when I came in. She didn't say anything. She just gestured. "Come." I walked the length of the store. Honey followed at my heels. Hollis didn't seem surprised to see her. The back of the store had a workshop area, a long bench, a pegboard hung with tools. Above the pegboard, 6 framed photographs, black and white. Hollis pointed to one of the photographs. It was bigger than the others. Hung in the center, a wide black frame. I stepped closer. 4 women stood in a row in front of a steel framework. The framework reached up out of the picture, the beginnings of a water tower, half built, the curved tank still on the ground beside it. The women wore work clothes, coveralls, boots. Their hair was tied back. One of them had a wrench in her hand. One had a clipboard. One had her arm around the shoulders of the smallest, youngest-looking one. All 4 were smiling. It was 1974. The date was written along the bottom of the frame in white ink. Ainsworth Sisters, Summer 1974. Hollis put her finger gently on the glass. "That's Beatrice on the left, the oldest. She was the engineer of the 4, did the math, drew the plans." She moved her finger. "That's Florence next to her. Plumbing. She could hear a leak through 3 walls." She moved her finger again. "That's May on the end, the youngest. She was the welder. Best welder this county ever had. She was only 19 in that picture." Her finger stopped, in the middle of the 4 women. the one with her arm around the youngest, a woman in her late 20s, dark hair pinned back from her face, a wide-open smile, eyes I had seen before, eyes I had seen every day for the first 8 years of my life. And that, Hollis said. Her voice broke a little. She didn't try to hide it. That is your grandmother, Eleanor Ainsworth. She was the foreman. She was the one who held the whole crew together. She was... Hollis stopped. She took her hand away from the glass. She turned to look at me. She was the bravest person I have ever known, Hollis said, and we let them run her out of this town. I couldn't speak. I stood in front of the photograph and I couldn't speak. My grandmother, 20-something, wearing coveralls, standing next to a half-built water tower with her arm around her little sister. She looked so happy. She looked so young. She looked so alive. I had only ever known her as old, as tired, as a woman in a recliner with arthritic hands. I had never imagined her like this, with a wrench in the photograph propped against her hip, with dirt on her cheek, with a future spread out in front of her. Hollis. My voice was hoarse. Hollis, what happened? She didn't answer me right away. She crossed to a small refrigerator under the workbench and pulled out 2 bottles of cold water. She handed one to me. I held it in both hands, but I didn't open it. Sit down, Caleb. She gestured to a wooden stool. I sat. Honey curled up at my feet. Hollis pulled up another stool. She sat across from me. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering something, choosing her words. Your grandmother and her sisters came to Briar Hollow in 1974, she said. Their daddy had been a master plumber, a mechanic, a water systems man. He taught them everything he knew, because he didn't have any sons, and he didn't see why daughters couldn't learn just as well. He died young. Heart attack, summer of 73. The girls, they kept the business going. 4 sisters running a waterworks company. In 1974. She shook her head. You have to understand what that looked like back then, Caleb. Women didn't do that work. They didn't. There were bank loans they couldn't get, permits they had to file under their daddy's name, even after he was dead. But they did it anyway. She paused. Briar Hollow's town council had been trying to put in a municipal water system for 10 years. Couldn't afford the big contractors out of Indianapolis. The Ainsworth sisters submitted a bid that was 1/3 of what the big firms wanted. The town hired them. Took a vote. 6-1. There was opposition. From one family in particular. She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. I had a feeling I'd hear it soon enough. The girls built that tower in 14 months, Hollis said. 14 months, Caleb. Working in summer heat. Working in February ice. Eleanor was the one who climbed up on the framework when the welder didn't show. May was 19, and she could lay a weld cleaner than most men twice her age. Beatrice ran the books and yelled at suppliers. Florence found leaks that nobody else could find. Hollis stopped. She looked at her hands. And then 1976 happened. What happened in 1976? She didn't answer. Hollis, what happened in 1976? She looked up. Her eyes were red. That's not for me to tell you in one sitting, son. That story needs to be told by your grandmother, and she left you a way to hear it. I just didn't know it until you walked into my store today. What do you mean? I mean, she came back here, Caleb. What? She came back. About 14 years ago. She drove all the way back to Briar Hollow. She didn't tell me. She didn't tell anyone. But Bernard Tate, the carpenter who lives out past the cemetery, saw her car at the lot one afternoon. Said she sat out there for hours. Said she had a shovel and a bag and a wooden box. He didn't approach her. He said she looked like a woman who needed to be left alone with what she was doing. I stared at Hollis. She buried something. I believe she did. Where? I believe, Hollis said. You're going to find that out. I walked back to the lot. I didn't run. I didn't drive. I had no truck. I just walked. Honey trotting at my heels. The sun was high now. The wind had died down. The chain-link fence was up ahead. I went straight to the foundation. I stood in the middle of it. I turned slowly in a circle, looking, just looking. The way you look at a face you've seen 1,000 times when you suddenly realize you've never really looked at it. The foundation was a concrete slab, roughly 30 feet across. Around its perimeter, rusted bolts stood up out of the surface where the tower's legs had once been anchored. But the slab wasn't uniform. I could see that now. In the center of the foundation, near where the brick was, there was a seam, a faint line in the concrete. The kind of line you only notice if you're looking. The kind of line that says, "This was poured at a different time than the rest." Honey trotted past me and stopped in the middle of the slab. She lowered her nose to the seam. She sniffed, and then she started to dig. Her front paws went into the dirt that had settled into the seam over 50 years. She dug like she'd been waiting for permission. She dug like she remembered something I didn't. I knelt down beside her. I put my hand on the concrete. I knocked on it. The section to the right of the seam sounded solid. The section to the left of the seam sounded hollow. He sat back. The wind moved across the lot. A loose piece of corrugated metal somewhere behind me rattled against a fence post. Hollow. There was something underneath. My grandmother had come back to this lot 14 years ago, with a shovel and a bag and a wooden box. She had sat out here for hours, alone, doing something she didn't tell anyone about. And 3 months later, she had died. I pressed my hand flat against the hollow section of concrete. "Grandma," I said. My voice was barely a sound. "Grandma, what did you leave for me?" The wind picked up a little. Honey looked up at me with her wet caramel eyes. I sat there on the foundation of a water tower that 4 sisters had built in 1974. I sat there with a dog who had been waiting in the rubble for who knows how long. I sat there with a name carved into a brick and a story I didn't yet know. I sat there for a long time, and then a car turned onto Tower Road. Black, polished, too expensive for a dirt road in Indiana. It rolled to a stop just outside the chain-link gate. The engine cut. A man stepped out, late 40s, salted his temples, a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows. Boots that had never seen a job site. He stood at the gate. He didn't open it. He just stood there, looking at me, looking at the foundation, looking, especially, at the spot where Honey was still standing right over the hollow seam. And then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "You must be the young man," he said, "who bought my water tower." Honey's ears went flat against her head. A low growl began in her throat. And somewhere underneath us, 50 years, deep sealed, in concrete by hands I had never gotten to thank. My grandmother's secret was waiting. To be continued. He stood at the gate and smiled at me like I was a problem he already knew how to solve. "You must be the young man who bought my water tower," Honey growled. I stood up, slowly, my hands and knees covered in dirt from the foundation. "Is not your water tower?" "Wasn't a question, son. I know what I own. You don't own this. Not yet." He let that sit there. He let it sit there, the way a man lets a knife sit on a table between 2 people who both know what the knife is for. Then he opened the gate, walked through, didn't ask, didn't wait. Just walked into my half-acre like the chain-link fence was a suggestion. Walter Pemberton. He held out a hand. I didn't take it. He didn't seem surprised. He pulled a business card from his shirt pocket instead. Cream-colored. Embossed letters. He set it on a chunk of broken concrete near my foot. Pemberton Holdings, LLC. A phone number. An office in Indianapolis. "This parcel," Walter said, "was supposed to be held by the county for commercial rezoning. It should never have ended up in a surplus auction. I've already been in contact with the county assessor's office. There's going to be a challenge filed. The sale was legal. Sales can be reviewed. I signed the deed. Deeds can be undone, son. I'm not your son." He smiled again. Something about that smile. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even frustration. It was the smile of a man who already knew how this story ended. Because he'd seen it end the same way a dozen times before. Because his family had been ending this story the same way for 50 years. "Mr. Rainsworth," he said. He said my last name carefully. He said it the way Margaret had said it at the auction, like it meant something he wasn't going to explain. "Mr. Ainsworth, I'm going to make this easy for you. $9,000, cash, today." I stared at him. $9,000. $9,000. I had $58 in my pocket and a dog that needed antibiotics for her infected paw and no plan past the end of the week. $9,000 was a year of rent. It was a working truck. It was the dental work I'd needed for 2 years. It was. It was everything. Except it wasn't. Because somewhere underneath me, in a hollow space my grandmother had dug with her own hands, was the rest of her. No, I said. He blinked. He actually blinked, like he hadn't quite heard me right. I don't think you understand. I understand fine. So, my answer is no. The smile finally cracked. Just at the corners. He stepped closer. Not threatening. Not exactly. Just closer. Close enough that I could smell expensive cologne in the inside of an air-conditioned car. You don't know what you're standing on, he said quietly. You're right, I don't. But I know who put it here. And I know it wasn't your family. His face did something then. Something quick. Something that flickered and disappeared. He stepped back. He straightened his cuffs. He looked at Honey still growling, low and steady, and he looked at me, and he nodded once. I'll be in touch, he said. Don't bother. Oh, Mr. Ainsworth. He paused at the gate. I'm going to bother. Then he was gone. The black car pulled away. Dust rose up off the dirt road and hung there for a long time after the engine sound had faded. I stood in the middle of my half-acre. I looked down at Honey. Honey looked up at me. Her tail wagged once. A small, careful wag. And I sat down on the concrete and put my forehead against my knees and breathed. I didn't open it that day. The hollow seam. The thing underneath. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But my hands were shaking. My head was full of Walter Pemberton's voice, and the photograph of 4 women in coveralls, and the look on Hollis's face when she said we did not deserve her. I needed tools. I needed light. I needed a quiet I didn't have. I needed to be ready, because whatever my grandmother had buried under that foundation, whatever she'd driven 600 miles, alone, at 65 years old with a bad heart, to leave for someone she didn't know would ever come looking, it deserved more than shaking hands. So I waited. One more night. I ate the last of the peanut butter on the last of the bread. I gave Honey the crusts. I lay under the tarp and watched the stars come out and tried to picture my grandmother at 27, climbing a steel framework with a wrench in her hand. I couldn't. I tried harder. I still couldn't. The grandmother I knew had been small, soft. Her hands had been crooked with arthritis. She had needed help opening jars. She had cried at television commercials and saved every birthday card I ever made her in a shoebox under her bed. I didn't know how to fit those 2 women into the same body. But they were. They were. In the morning, I walked to Hollis's store. I had $38 left. I bought a pry bar, a hammer, a flashlight with batteries, a small folding shovel, a box of contractor-grade trash bags, a pair of safety goggles, a bottle of water, a can of soup. Hollis rang me up. She looked at the total on the register. She looked at me. She hit a button. The total changed. That'll be $15.40, she said. Hollis. I rang it wrong. Happens all the time. Hollis. That's not. Caleb. She set her hands flat on the counter. She looked me dead in the eye. You let me do this, she said. You don't argue with an old woman who's trying to do something she should have done 49 years ago. Do you understand me? Do you understand me? I swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Good. Now take your tools and go find out what she left for you. I paid the $15.40. I walked out of the store. Honey was waiting for me on the sidewalk. I'd left her tied to a parking meter with a length of twine. She had not made a sound the entire time I was inside. She just sat there, watching the door, waiting. She had decided, somewhere in the last few days, that I was the one she was going to wait for. I had not decided yet what I was going to do with that. But I knelt down on the sidewalk and pressed my forehead against her forehead and let her lick my chin. And I thought, maybe this is what staying feels like. I had never stayed anywhere long enough to find out. I started with the pry bar. The seam in the concrete was thin, maybe a 1/4 inch wide, sealed with something dark tar, or maybe roofing cork that had hardened over the years into something the consistency of old chewing gum. I worked the flat edge of the bar into the seam. I pushed. The concrete didn't move. I pushed harder. I leaned my whole body into it. My hands shook. The bar bit. The seam cracked. A thin black line of old caulk crumbled out of the gap. I worked around the whole panel, inch by inch. It took 2 hours. When I finally got the bar under the edge and levered it up slow, careful, terrified of breaking what was underneath, the concrete lifted. It lifted. A square section of slab, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, 4 inches thick. I dragged it sideways. It scraped against the rest of the foundation. The sound was awful, this dry rasp like teeth on stone. I set the panel down on the dirt. I knelt at the edge of the hole. I turned on the flashlight, and I looked down. It was a chamber, maybe 4 feet deep, maybe 3 feet across. Concrete walls, a concrete floor. Dry, bone dry. After 50-some years buried in Indiana ground, it was dry. Whoever had built it had known what they were doing. The walls were smooth. The corners were sharp. There were no cracks. There was no leak. It was a tiny, perfect room, a tiny, perfect vault, built to last. In the center of the floor, a wooden box, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with twine, and on the wall above it, carved into the concrete. Carved while the concrete was still wet, by a hand that had pressed something, a screwdriver maybe, or the end of a wrench into the surface and dragged it through. Words. I lowered myself into the chamber. My boots hit the floor. The flashlight beam climbed up the wall. The carving was deep, made to last. For any Ainsworth who comes back, we loved you. We never stopped. I stood in that chamber for a long time. I put my hand on the carved letters. I traced them with my finger. She had stood right here. My grandmother, Eleanor, 65 years old. A heart that was already starting to give out. She had stood in this hole and carved this with her own hands. And she had not known if anyone would ever read it. But she had carved it anyway. In case. Just in case. I picked up the wooden box. It was heavier than it looked. I climbed back out of the chamber and sat on the foundation with the box on my lap and the wind moving through the weeds and Honey pressing her warm body against my leg. I untied the twine. I unwrapped the oilcloth. The box was walnut. Dark. Dovetailed corners. A hinged lid. Built by someone who knew how to build things to last. I lifted the lid. Inside, a leather-bound journal. Brown. Soft. The corners worn round from being handled. A stack of photographs, wrapped in wax paper, tied with kitchen string. A bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. And on top of everything, a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, handwriting across the front in deliberate block letters. To whoever finds this. My name was Eleanor Ainsworth. Please, read the journal first. I sat on the foundation for the rest of the afternoon. I read the journal. I won't tell you all of it. The journal was mine. The journal was hers. The journal was a private conversation between a woman who had been dead for 14 years and the grandson she'd never gotten to see grow up. But I'll tell you what I learned. I'll tell you the parts you need to know. The first entry was dated April 1974. We arrived in Briar Hollow today. Beatrice drove. I sat in the back with May and Florence and the dog. Daddy is buried in Riverside Cemetery in Ohio. We have been on the road for 2 weeks. We have one toolbox between us and $78 and a contract. $78. $5 more than I had walked into this town with. The journal went on. It described the build. Slowly. In her handwriting that I would have known anywhere, looped. Careful. The way she used to sign my report cards. She wrote about the wind off the cornfields. About the first time the mayor came out to inspect their work and didn't quite know where to look when he realized the foreman was a woman. About May singing on the framework at sunset because May always sang when she welded. She wrote about Florence and the leak in the south pipe that took 11 days to find. She wrote about Beatrice yelling at a supplier who tried to charge them double because the girls won't know any better. She wrote about a town that, slowly, began to love them. A town that brought casseroles to their motel. A town that taught their dog tricks. A town that opened the first running water valve in Mrs. Henley's kitchen and watched a 60-year-old woman put her hands under the faucet and weep. She said, "My grandmother wrote, I never thought I'd live to see clean water in my own house." And May was standing next to me, and May was 19 years old, and May took my hand and squeezed it. And I thought this is what we were put on this earth to do. I had to stop reading. I had to put the journal down. I had to breathe. Because the woman I had known, the woman who had raised me, the woman who had sat in a recliner and stitched a rose onto a handkerchief, and never once mentioned any of this. That woman had once stood next to her little sister and felt the entire shape of her own life click into place. And then I turned the page. The entries from late 1974 and all of 1975 were good entries. They were happy entries. The Ainsworth Waterworks became Briar Hollow's water system. The tower went up. The pipes went down. The valves opened. My grandmother fell in love with a man named Howard. Howard worked at the feed store. Howard was, in her words, quiet in a way that made you want to be quiet next to him. They were married in the spring of 1975. I sat with that for a long time. Howard. I had never even heard his name before. He must have been my grandfather. He must have given me half my name and half my blood, and I had never even known he existed. I read on. The journal said Howard had a weak heart even back then. The doctors warned him. He didn't listen. He worked the feed store, and he loved Eleanor, and he died of a heart attack in 1989 in a hospital bed in Ohio, with Eleanor holding his hand. He never met me. He died 15 years before I was born. I closed my eyes. My grandfather. A man named Howard, who worked at a feed store. A man who had loved my grandmother enough that she had carried him in her heart for the rest of her life and never said his name out loud to me, not even once. Why hadn't she? Why hadn't she told me? I think sitting on that foundation, holding that journal, I started to understand. She wasn't hiding anything because she was ashamed. She was hiding it because it hurt. Some women carry their pain by talking about it. Some women carry it by going quiet. My grandmother had gone quiet for 48 years, because every name she didn't say was a name she didn't have to lose again. I kept reading. May turned 20. Florence and Beatrice talked about expanding the business to the next county. The sisters bought a small house together on Maple Street. They thought they were home. They thought they were going to stay. And then, January 1976, the handwriting changed. It got smaller. It got harder. The ink pressed deeper into the page. Gerald Pemberton came to the office today. That was the first line of the January 4th entry. Gerald Pemberton came to the office today and made an offer for the water rights. He said the town council would back him. He said the system needed to be in private hands. He said the system needed to be in his hands. I told him no. Beatrice told him no. Florence told him no. And then he turned to May. I stopped reading. I looked up. Honey was watching me. The sun was going down. The wind had a bite in it now. I made myself keep reading. I won't tell you all of it, but I'll tell you this. Gerald Pemberton, Walter Pemberton's grandfather, wanted the water tower. He wanted the system. He wanted the contracts. He wanted what those 4 women had built with their hands. And when he couldn't buy it, he decided to take it. He started with rumors that the Ainsworth sisters had falsified their permits, that they had stolen materials, that Beatrice had an unnatural relationship with one of the female suppliers. That May, 19 years old, May was loose with the construction crew. The rumors did damage. 2 contracts got cancelled. The bank tightened the line of credit. Then it got worse. Gerald started showing up at their job sites with men. Not workers, just men, standing around, watching. May was working alone one afternoon in late February. She was 20 years old. She was welding a coupling on a stretch of pipe behind the tower. 2 of Gerald's men cornered her. They didn't touch her. They told her what they would do if she didn't agree to marry Gerald's son. She told them no. She told them no. She told them no. She came home that night, and she told Eleanor and Beatrice and Florence what had happened. And the sisters held a meeting in their small kitchen on Maple Street. And they decided. They decided to fight. They decided not to leave. They decided. The journal entry from that night was the longest one I'd read. It ended with this line: "We have built water systems with our hands. We are not going to be moved by a man with a checkbook and a smile." I closed my eyes. I knew what came next. I didn't want to read it, but I read it. The night of the 11th of March, 1976. The Ainsworth Waterworks Workshop, a small wooden building behind the tower where they kept their tools and their welding equipment and their records, caught fire at 3 a.m. May was inside. She had been working late on a custom valve fitting for a farmhouse on the edge of town. She had told her sisters she would be home by midnight. She had not come home by midnight. Eleanor had gone looking. By the time Eleanor reached the workshop, the building was already burning. The door was jammed. It had been jammed from the outside. A 2x4 had been wedged against the latch. Eleanor pulled the board free with her bare hands. She broke 2 of her fingers doing it. She dragged May out of that workshop herself. May was alive, but May was burned. Her right arm, her right side, part of her face. May was never going to weld again. May, who had been singing on the framework just 2 summers before, was never going to do the thing she had loved most in the world. The fire was ruled accidental. A faulty welding torch, the report said. There was no investigation. There was no follow-up. Gerald Pemberton sat on the town council. Gerald Pemberton was friends with the fire chief. Gerald Pemberton was friends with the mayor. The Ainsworth Waterworks went bankrupt within 4 months. By the fall of 1976, all 4 sisters were gone from Briar Hollow. Howard went with Eleanor. They lost their house. They lost their savings. They lost the business. But the journal said, they did not lose us. They scattered us. But they did not lose us. Every drop of water that runs through this town runs through pipes we laid. They will drink our work for 100 years. They will never know whose hands put the iron in the ground. But I will know. And someday, somehow, someone else will know too. I closed the journal. I held it against my chest. The sun was almost gone now. I sat on my grandmother's foundation, and I cried. I didn't cry pretty. I cried the way you cry, when 50 years of someone else's pain finally finds you, hard, loud. Honey climbed into my lap and pressed her wet nose against my throat. I cried for May, 20 years old, singing on a steel framework. I cried for Beatrice and Florence, sisters I would never meet, sisters my grandmother had loved. I cried for Howard, the grandfather I would never get to thank. I cried for my grandmother, for everything she had lost, for everything she had carried alone, for every time she had stitched a rose onto a handkerchief in a small apartment 600 miles from here, and never told me her own story. Why didn't you tell me? I kept thinking. Why didn't you tell me, Grandma? Why did I have to find out like this? The next morning, I walked back to Hollis's store. I didn't go inside. I sat on the wooden bench out front, on the sidewalk, with the journal in my lap. Hollis came out without a word. She sat next to me. She didn't ask what I'd found. She didn't ask if I'd read it. She just sat there in the morning sun and waited. After a while, I said, "You knew." I knew. All of it. Most of it. I was 18 the year of the fire. I worked at this store. My father owned it back then. He was one of the few men on the town council who didn't vote against your grandmother. How many were there? On the council? 9. And how many sided with her? 4. I closed my eyes. Caleb. Yes. Why didn't anyone? Stop? I nodded. She was quiet for a long time. Because Gerald Pemberton owned the bank, Caleb. He owned the lumber yard. He owned half the farms in this county on paper. He could call in a loan and put a family out of a 100-year-old home in 48 hours. Some of us tried. My father tried. He spoke at the council meeting after the fire. He stood up and said what we all knew, that it wasn't an accident. She paused. 2 weeks later, our shop was vandalized. Twice. A brick through the window. Tools stolen. My father got the message. She looked at her hands. He never spoke up again. I looked at her. That's why you said that we didn't deserve her? Yes, that's why. She turned to face me. Your grandmother left this town in shame, Caleb. She left believing the people she had built water for had turned their backs on her. And the truth, the awful truth, is that most of us did. We'll let it happen. We'll let her go. And we have been drinking water from her pipes for 50 years. She wiped her eye with the heel of her hand. So when you tell me your name is Caleb Ainsworth, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. She put her hand over mine. We sat there on the bench for a long time. That afternoon I went to the bank. The Briar Hollow Community Bank. 1 story, Brick. The small brass plaque by the door. EST. 1958. I'd taken the bundle of papers from the box, the ones tied with blue ribbon. I'd looked at them only enough to know what they were. U.S. savings bonds. Series E. A whole stack, dated between 1974 and 1980, issued in the name of Eleanor Ainsworth, payable to her or to her heirs. The teller looked at the bonds, looked at me, excused herself, came back with the branch manager, a woman in her 50s, reading glasses, a name tag that said Greeter. She took me into an office. She closed the door. She sat across from me with a calculator and a chart of bond maturity values. She didn't say much at first. She just worked, pen scratching on a notepad, fingers tapping the calculator. After a long time, she set down the pen. She folded her hands. She looked at me. "Mr. Ainsworth," she said. "Yes, ma'am. These bonds have all reached final maturity." "Yes, ma'am. They have been earning interest for between 45 and 50 years." "Yes." She slid the notepad across the desk to me. I looked down at it. The number written on the page was... I stared at it. I read it once. I read it twice. I read it a third time. Greta. "Yes, Mr. Ainsworth. This says... I know what it says. Greta. This can't be." "It is, Mr. Ainsworth. It is correct. The combined matured value of these bonds as of today is $51,812. I sat very still. My hands were on the arms of the chair. I gripped them. $51,812. I had never had more than $400 at one time in my entire life. My grandmother, Eleanor Mrs. Howard Ainsworth, had bought these bonds in tiny amounts, $50 here, $100 there, out of a salary so small that she had cleaned other people's houses to make rent for 45 years. For me, for someone, for whoever came after, for just in case. Greta handed me a box of tissues. I didn't notice I was crying until I tried to thank her and couldn't get the words out. She also did something I didn't expect. She advanced me $300 on the spot, said the bank had a small emergency hardship fund, and she'd already cleared it with the manager. I think she just wanted to make sure I had enough to eat that week. I used the first 100 of it the next morning to drive to a veterinarian in the next county over. A small clinic, cinder block walls, a woman in scrubs who didn't ask any questions when I carried Honey in, antibiotics, a splint, a bath, a nail trim, a bag of food. The vet said Honey's paw had been broken and had healed wrong. It would take 6 weeks for the new splint to do its work. 6 weeks later, the limp was gone. That was one of the best $100 I have ever spent. I walked back to the lot. The bonds were in a manila envelope under my arm. The processing was going to take a couple of weeks. I bought lumber that afternoon. Plywood, 2x4s, roofing nails, a real tarp, a propane lantern. I sat on the foundation and watched Honey eat. I thought I have a dog. I have a piece of land. I have a grandmother who loved me before I existed. I have, against every odd, $51,812, and the day was not even over. Bernard Tate showed up the next morning. He came on foot, from the direction of the cemetery, like Hollis had said, an old man in canvas work pants and a flannel shirt, and a green ball cap that said Indiana FFA, 1968. He was carrying a toolbox in one hand and a thermos in the other. He stopped at the gate. He didn't come in. "You're the Ainsworth boy." "Yes, sir. My name is Bernard Tate. Folks call me Bernie. I'm 74 years old, and I haven't built anything in 2 years, and I'm losing my mind in my own kitchen." I stared at him. "Okay," I said. "My wife Norma died on the 3rd of November, 2 years ago. I have built 172 birdhouses since. My daughter says if I build another birdhouse, she's going to put me in a home." "Okay. I saw your grandmother out here 14 years ago. I never told anybody. I should have walked up to her then and asked if she needed help. I didn't. I let her sit alone in the dirt with a shovel and a wooden box, and I drove home, and I have thought about that afternoon every day for 14 years. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. "I'm not going to make that mistake twice," he said. "If you want help building, I'm available. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a reason to get out of the house." I walked to the gate. I opened it. "Mr. Tate." Bernie. I would be honored." He stepped through. He set his toolbox down on a stack of new lumber. He looked at the foundation, at the open chamber, at the wooden box, still sitting on the slab. He took off his cap. He held it against his chest. "Hello, Eleanor," he said, very softly, to nobody I could see. Then he put his cap back on and turned to me and said, "Now, show me what we've got, son. We've got walls to frame." For 2 weeks we worked. Bernie came every morning. Hollis came every afternoon with lunch. People started showing up. A plumber named Hector, who said he'd run a water line for free if I let his church youth group count it as service hours. A retired electrician named Sheila, who showed up with a roll of Romex wire and didn't ask, just started pulling it through the studs. A woman from the diner who started leaving a thermos of coffee on the foundation every morning before sunrise. Briar Hollow. The same Briar Hollow that had let 4 sisters burn. The same Briar Hollow that had let my grandmother leave. It was, 50 years later, showing up for me. A wall went up, then another. Bernie taught me how to plumb a stud with a level, how to drive a 16-penny nail in 3 strikes if you swung right, how to look at a piece of lumber and know which way it would warp. He cursed at me when I held the saw wrong. He laughed when I bent my first nail. He clapped my shoulder when I drove my first straight nail clean. It was the first time, in a long time, that someone had clapped my shoulder for doing something right. I almost cried again. I didn't. I just nodded and kept working. I should have known it wouldn't last. I should have known. Because the thing about a story like this is that the moment you start to believe it's going to be okay, the moment you let your shoulders drop, the moment you start to trust the ground, that is exactly the moment the ground gives. It happened on a Tuesday. It happened at 4 a.m. It happened the way these things always happen. Quietly, without warning. Until the warning came. I woke up because Honey was barking. She didn't bark. She didn't. In the weeks I'd known her, Honey had whined and whimpered and growled, but she had never barked, not once. Now she was barking. Loud and frantic. I sat up in the half-built frame of what was going to be my house. The walls were up, but the roof wasn't. I had been sleeping on a cot in the corner. There was light. There was light outside. Light that should not have been there at 4 a.m. I scrambled out of the cot. I ran outside. The pile of fresh lumber on the south side of the lot was on fire. The flames were tall already. They had been working at it for a while. The smell of accelerant, gasoline, something. The wood crackled and popped and threw orange light across the entire foundation. I screamed. I'm not proud of it, but I did. I screamed. I ran for the garden hose Bernie and I had hooked up to the new water line. I dragged it. I turned it on. I sprayed. The water hit the lumber and steam erupted in a great white wall. Honey kept barking. I kept spraying. It took 20 minutes. By the time the flames were down, I was soaked through. My hands were raw. The lumber was a charred ruin. Maybe $1,000 worth of new framing. Gone. The smoke hung in the cold air. I stood there, shaking. Honey came up beside me. She wasn't barking anymore. She was growling. Low, steady, facing the road. I turned. On the dirt road, just past the gate, half tucked into the weeds, a piece of paper, folded ones, held down by a rock. I walked over. I picked it up. I unfolded it under the light from the burning lumber pile. Block letters. Black. Marker. 3 lines. Get out of this town, you dirty Ainsworth, or the next fire burns you. I stood in the dirt road of Briar Hollow, Indiana, with the smell of gasoline in my nose and the smoke from a deliberate fire still rising behind me. I stood in the same dirt where my grandmother had walked out of this town, broken, in 1976. And I felt for one terrible second, I felt exactly what she must have felt. The pull, the terrible, ancient pull, to just go, to pack the duffel bag, to leash the dog, to walk back to Highway 9 and never look at this place again. Because what was I doing? What was I doing? 22 years old. Half a house. A dog. A burned-out lumber pile. A man with money and lawyers, and a name as old as this town deciding I was a problem he was going to make disappear. Who was I to fight that? Who did I think I was? I sat down in the dirt. Honey climbed into my lap. I put my hand in my back pocket. I pulled out the handkerchief. The rose was nearly invisible in the dark, but I could feel the stitching, the careful loops. I closed my hand around it, and I heard her voice. I swear I heard it. Not in my head, not really, but in the way memory comes back when it wants to. Sweet boy, don't run. The ones who burn things are afraid. The ones who stay are the ones who win. I sat in the dirt with my dog in my lap and my grandmother's handkerchief in my hand, and the smoke of a deliberate fire rising behind me. And I said, out loud, to no one, to everyone, to her, I'm staying. To be continued. The sun came up. I had not slept. I was still sitting in the dirt where I had sat down at 4 a.m. Honey was still in my lap. The handkerchief was still in my hand. The lumber pile was a black smear of ash and warped boards. And I was still here. That was the thing. I was still here. I stood up. My knees cracked. Honey jumped down and shook herself off and looked up at me like, okay, what now? What now? What now was I needed to call Hollis? Except I didn't have a phone. So I walked. I walked into town with soot on my hands and smoke in my hair, and a folded note in my back pocket that said the next fire burns you. The streetlights were still on. The sky was that color it gets, right before dawn, that color that isn't blue and isn't gold and isn't anything you can name. Hollis's store was dark. I sat down on the bench out front. Honey lay down at my feet. We waited. She showed up at 7. She had her keys in her hand. She was wearing the same canvas apron over a different flannel. She was carrying a paper bag from the diner. She saw me on the bench. She stopped walking. She looked at my hands, at my hair, at Honey's fur, which had ash in it. She set the paper bag down on the sidewalk. What happened? Somebody set my lumber on fire. When? 4 this morning. Are you hurt? No. Is the dog? No. She nodded. She unlocked the store. She held the door open. She did not ask anything else. We went inside. She put a kettle on the hot plate behind the counter. She made coffee. She handed me a mug. She sat down on a stool across from me, and she crossed her arms, and she waited until I was ready. I pulled the note out of my back pocket. I slid it across the counter. Hollis read it. She read it again. She set it down very carefully, like it was something that might break. Like it was something that might break her. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, Caleb, yes, listen to me. Yes, you are going to drink that coffee, and then you are going to go back out to that lot, and you are going to start cleaning up, and you are not going to be alone when you do. Hollis, you are not going to be alone. She picked up the phone behind the counter. She dialed a number from memory. Bernie. It's Hollis. Get to the Ainsworth lot. Now. She hung up. She dialed another number. Sheila. I need you to bring every spare extension cord and work glass you've got. The lot. Yes. Now. She hung up. She dialed again. Purster. It's Hollis Caldwell. I need every able body you can spare on the Tower Road lot by noon. Yes. I'll explain when you get there. Yes. Today. She set the phone down. She looked at me. Drink your coffee, Caleb. I drank my coffee. By noon, there were 36 people on my half-acre. I counted them. Twice. 36. Bernie was there with his nail gun. Sheila with the work lights. Hector the plumber. The woman from the diner who had been leaving me coffee. Her name was Doris, and she was 68. And she had brought a fold-out table and a coffee urn, and a tray of egg sandwiches she'd made herself. Pastor Brennan came. He was maybe 50. He brought 4 teenagers from his youth group, who looked like they would rather be anywhere else, and worked the entire afternoon without complaining once. A man named Earl came. Earl was a roofer. Earl said he'd heard. Earl said he'd brought shingles. A woman named Winifred Hatcher came. She was 76 years old. She walked with a cane. She brought a pie. She walked straight up to me. She set the pie down on the foundation. She took my hand in both of hers. Your grandmother fixed my mama's pump in the summer of '75 and refused to take $1 for it. Ma'am, you don't have to. Hush. I have been waiting 50 years to pay that debt. Now I'm paying it. She squeezed my hand. She walked over to Doris and started slicing pie onto paper plates. I stood in the middle of the lot. I looked around. 36 people. On my half-acre. I had never been in a room, let alone a field, with 36 people who were there for me. I went around the back of the half-built house. I pretended I needed something from my duffel bag. I sat down in the weeds. I cried for maybe 4 minutes. Then I wiped my face on my sleeve. Then I got back to work. The new lumber was on the lot by 2. Hector and Bernie had driven into Indianapolis in Bernie's pickup. They had spent, I found out later, almost $3,000 between them. Bernie had used his late wife's life insurance money. Hector had used the emergency fund his wife kept in a coffee can in their pantry. They told me later, they told me much later, that afternoon, all they said was, "Where you want this stacked, son?" That was it. That was all they said. I read the rest of the journal that night. I had been putting it off. There were entries near the back I hadn't gotten to. Entries written in a different hand, a shakier hand, a much older hand. I sat in the half-built house with the propane lantern hissing softly and honey curled at my feet, and I opened the journal to the back, and I read what my grandmother had written when she came back to Briar Hollow in 2012. She was 65 years old. Her heart was failing. She had less than a year to live. She had driven 600 miles alone in a Buick that wasn't really safe to drive that far. She had checked into a motel on the edge of town. She had bought a shovel at a hardware store, 1 county over, so nobody in Briar Hollow would recognize her face. And then she had come out here, to this lot, to this foundation. She had dug, by herself, at 65, with a bad heart. She had broken through the original foundation. She had built the chamber underneath. She had carved the words into the wet concrete with the end of a screwdriver. She had wrapped the box in oilcloth and set it inside, and she had sealed it back up, by herself, in one afternoon. She wrote about it on the last page. I am sitting in my car. The work is done. My hands are shaking. I don't know if it is the cold or the heart or both. I drove 600 miles for this. I dug a hole at the age of 65 for this. I did this because I have a grandson. His name is Caleb. He is 8 years old. He is sleeping right now in our apartment back home, and he does not know that I am gone for the weekend. I told him I was going to a church retreat. I told a lie to an 8-year-old child to come and do this thing. I did it because I do not think I have very long. I did it because someone needs to remember us. I did it because I refused to let 4 Ainsworth women disappear from a town we built. I did it because someday, somehow, the right person is going to find what I left behind, and they are going to know we existed, we mattered. We were not what they said we were. I hope it is Caleb. I hope it is my sweet boy. But if it isn't, if it is some stranger 50 years from now, then I hope you, stranger, know that you have been loved by a woman you never met. That is all. Eleanor Ainsworth. September 2012. I closed the journal. I held it against my chest. Honey lifted her head. She looked at me. She put her head back down. I sat in that half-built house in the dark, and I said out loud to her, to all of them, to the 4 sisters in the photograph above Hollis's workbench, I found it, Grandma. I'm here. I don't know if anyone heard me. I think someone did. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd Tuesday in November. Walter Pemberton's lawyer filed a formal motion to vacate the auction. The grounds were exactly what Walter had told me they would be: that the parcel had been improperly listed, that it should have been held under a commercial overlay, that the county had failed in its duty. There was a county board of supervisors, 5 members. They would vote. Hollis had a friend on the board. The friend told her, off the record, that the vote was probably 4-1 against me. 4-1. I had 9 days. 9 days to convince a county board of supervisors that a homeless 22-year-old with a $15 deed deserved to keep a piece of land that a man named Pemberton said was his. I almost laughed. It would have been funny, except it wasn't. I started writing. I wrote out everything. By hand. in a spiral notebook Bernie gave me from his truck. I wrote about the brick. I wrote about the chamber. I wrote about the photograph in Hollis's store. I wrote about the journal. I wrote about Gerald Pemberton and what he had done. I wrote about May. I wrote especially about May. May, who had been 19 years old and singing on the framework at sunset. May, who had been 20 when two men cornered her behind the tower and told her what they would do to her. May, who had been pulled out of a burning workshop with burns on a third of her body by a sister who broke her own fingers freeing the jammed door. May, who lived another 23 years in pain in a small house in Ohio, who never married, who never welded again, who died at age 44 of complications no one wanted to look at too closely. I wrote her name. I wrote it big at the top of the page. May Ainsworth. 1,955 to 1,999. I wrote it because nobody else had written it in 50 years. The morning of the hearing, Hollis drove me to the courthouse. I wore a button-down shirt she had bought me at the church thrift store. It was a size too big in the shoulders. The sleeves were rolled to my elbows. I had washed my hair in her bathroom sink that morning. I had the journal under my arm. I had the photographs in a manila envelope. I had my grandmother's handkerchief in my breast pocket, folded so the rose showed at the corner. Honey was at home with Bernie. I sat in the truck with Hollis idling at the curb. Caleb. Yes, you know what to say. I do. Then say it. Say it loud. Say it for her. I will. And Caleb. Yes. She reached across the cab. She put her hand on my arm. You're not alone in there. Look around. You hear me? I hear you. Go. I went. The hearing room was full. It was full. I have to stop and tell you that. Because I did not expect it. I had imagined I would walk into a sterile little room with 5 board members and a court reporter, and Walter Pemberton's lawyer, and the hum of fluorescent lights. That is not what I walked into. I walked into a room with maybe 100 people in it. Bernie was in the front row. Hollis came in behind me and slid into the seat next to him. Doris was there, Hector, Sheila, Pastor Brennan, the 4 teenagers from the youth group, Earl the roofer, Winifred Hatcher with her cane, and a hat with a small green feather in it. Greta, from the bank, was there, and in the back row, sitting alone wearing a navy blue dress and pearls, and an expression I could not read. Margaret, the county clerk, the woman who had spelled my name on a deed and looked at me like she had seen a ghost. Margaret was here. I had not expected that. I did not have time to think about it. Walter Pemberton sat at the table on the right side of the room. His lawyer was beside him. The lawyer was in a charcoal suit with a leather briefcase open on the table. Walter wore a dark gray sport coat. No tie. He did not look at me when I came in. The board sat at a long table on a raised platform. 5 members. 3 men, 2 women. The chair was a woman in her 60s named Dr. Patricia Webb. She rapped a gavel. Item 1. Petition to vacate the surplus auction sale of Parcel 14. Mr. Pemberton's counsel. You may proceed. The lawyer stood up. He talked for 20 minutes. He was good. He was very good. He used words like procedural irregularity and commercial overlay and aspirational zoning instruments. He laid out a calm, professional, well-organized argument for why the sale should be reversed and the land returned to county control for proper rezoning, and he was careful to say future development by qualified entities. Qualified entities, like Pemberton Holdings, LLC. He sat down. Dr. Webb turned to me. Mr. Ainsworth, you may respond. I stood up. I walked to the podium. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edges of the wood. I looked down at my notes. I had written out a whole speech. I closed the notebook. I did not need it. My name is Caleb Ainsworth, I said. I am 22 years old. 3 months ago I had $73 and a truck that didn't run. I walked into Briar Hollow because my truck died on the highway and I had nowhere else to go. I bought a half-acre of land at the county auction for $15. I bought it because I needed somewhere to sleep. I did not know when I bought it that my grandmother had built the water tower that used to stand on it. I did not know that her 3 sisters had built it with her. I did not know that they had been driven out of this town in 1976 by a man named Gerald Pemberton. The grandfather of the gentleman sitting at that table after he had their workshop burned down with my great-aunt, May, inside it. I did not know any of that. I had to find it out by digging through 50 years of concrete with a pry bar. I stopped. The room was silent. I opened the journal. I read the entry from April 1974. We arrived in Briar Hollow today. Beatrice drove. I read the entry from the day they opened the first faucet in Mrs. Henley's kitchen. I read the entry from January 1976. Gerald Pemberton came to the office today. I read the entry from the morning after the fire, the one where my grandmother described pulling May out of the burning workshop with her own broken hands. I read it slowly. I made them listen. I made them sit there in that room and listen to my grandmother's words, read out loud for the first time in 50 years. By the time I got to the last entry, the one she wrote sitting in her car in 2012, with a bad heart and a finished hole in the ground, there were people in that room crying. I could hear them. I did not look up. If I looked up, I would cry too. I finished reading. I closed the journal. I held it against my chest. I looked up. I looked at Dr. Patricia Webb. I looked at the 4 other board members. I looked at Walter Pemberton. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the table. I am not here, I said, to take anything from anyone. I am here because my grandmother spent 45 years saving $51,000 in U.S. savings bonds and buried them under a slab of concrete for any descendant of hers who might come back. I am here because she came back at 65 years old to dig that hole herself. I am here because I am the only descendant left. And I am here because I am tired. I am tired of a town that lets people like the Ainsworth sisters disappear without a fight. I am tired of a country that lets men like Gerald Pemberton write history. I am not going to let it happen again. I bought this land legally. I have the deed. I have the journal. I have the bonds. I have the photograph in Hollis Caldwell's hardware store of 4 women in coveralls standing in front of a water tower they built with their hands. I am not selling it. I am not leaving. I am staying. And I am building a workshop. And the workshop is going to bear my grandmother's name. And it is going to teach the things she taught herself. Welding, plumbing, framing. The kind of work people do with their hands. And it is going to be free. And it is going to be open to anyone in this town who walks through the gate. That is my answer. Thank you. I stepped back from the podium. I sat down. My legs did not feel like my legs anymore. Dr. Webb cleared her throat. Would anyone else like to speak in this matter? Hollis stood up. She didn't walk to the podium. She just stood up in her seat. My name is Hollis Caldwell. I own the hardware store on Main. My father served on the town council the year the Ainsworth sisters were run out of this town. He went to his grave ashamed. I have been ashamed for 50 years. Eleanor Ainsworth was the finest person this town ever knew. Her grandson is here. He has done more honest work on that lot in 3 months than this town has done for the Ainsworth name in half a century. The deed is his. The land is his. I will personally fight anyone who says otherwise. She sat down. Bernie stood up. Bernard Tate, retired carpenter. I have known Caleb Ainsworth for 2 months. He's a better young man than this town deserves. The lot is his. He sat down. Hector stood up. Sheila stood up. Doris stood up. Earl stood up. Pastor Brennan stood up. Winifred Hatcher stood up, slowly, with her cane. I am 86 years old, she said, loudly, so everyone in the back of the room could hear. And I remember Eleanor Ainsworth fixing my mother's water pump in the summer of 1975. I have lived long enough to see her grandson stand right where she once stood. I am going to die happy now. The land is his. She sat down. Greta from the bank stood up. I have processed Mr. Ainsworth's grandmother's bonds. They are valid. They are his. So is the land. I have nothing further to say. She sat down, one by one. 11 people, 12, 15. They stood up. They spoke. They said his name. Caleb Ainsworth. Caleb Ainsworth. Caleb Ainsworth. I sat in my chair, and I gripped the edge of it, and I did not cry. I did not cry. I did not cry. Dr. Webb, let it run. She did not stop them. She let every single person who wanted to speak, speak. It took an hour. When the last person sat down, Pastor Brennan's 17-year-old daughter, who said she wanted to take welding classes at the Ainsworth workshop, and her father didn't even know she'd come to speak. Dr. Webb leaned back in her chair. She looked at Walter Pemberton. "Anything to add, Mr. Pemberton?" Walter did not look up. His lawyer half stood. "Madam Chair, the procedural irregularities." I asked Mr. Pemberton. Walter did not look up. His lawyer sat down. Dr. Webb opened her mouth to call the vote. And that's when the door in the back of the hearing room opened. Margaret stood up from her seat in the back row. She was holding a manila folder. She walked down the center aisle of the hearing room, slowly, steadily. Her low heels clicked on the linoleum. Every head turned. She walked all the way to the front. She stopped at the podium. She looked at Dr. Webb. "Madam Chair, may I address the board?" "And you are?" "Margaret Pemberton Sloan." The room somehow got even quieter. Walter Pemberton's head came up. He stared at her. "Aunt Margaret." "Be quiet, Walter." "What are you?" "Be quiet." It was the voice of a woman who had not raised her voice in a long time and was not going to be argued with now. Walter shut his mouth. Margaret turned back to Dr. Webb. "I have lived in Briar Hollow my entire life. I am 66 years old. I am the county clerk. I have served in that office for 31 years. Most of you in this room know me as Margaret Sloan. I changed my name when I married my husband Robert in 1979. My maiden name was Pemberton. I am Gerald Pemberton's daughter. I am Walter Pemberton's aunt." The room exhaled. A single, collective sound. Margaret kept going. "I have been carrying something for 50 years. I am going to put it down today." She opened the manila folder. She removed an envelope, yellowed, sealed once and reopened many times. In March of 1976, 3 days after the workshop fire that nearly killed May Ainsworth, I overheard my father in his study at our home on Elm Street. He was on the telephone with a man named Lyle Carver. Mr. Carver is now deceased. He was, in 1976, an employee of my father's lumberyard. I was 16 years old. I was supposed to be in bed. I had come downstairs for a glass of water. I heard my father tell Mr. Carver that the fire had gone exactly as planned. I heard my father say that he had not intended for the girl to be inside. The girl was May Ainsworth. "I told you to make sure the building was empty," my father said. "I told you, and now we have a burned-up girl and a problem." I heard him say that they would handle it, that he would speak to the fire chief, that nobody was going to ask questions. I went back upstairs. I did not sleep that night. I did not sleep many nights after that. 2 weeks later, I went into my father's study while he was at the lumberyard. I opened the locked drawer of his desk. I knew where he kept the key. I had watched him hide it once when I was 12. Inside the drawer were ledgers. Payment ledgers. I found a payment to Mr. Carver, dated the 8th of March, 1976, 3 days before the fire. The notation in the ledger said workshop demo, AWW. AWW Ainsworth Waterworks. I tore the page out of the ledger. I put it in this envelope. I've kept it for 50 years. She held the envelope up. Her hand was shaking. I should have come forward in 1976. I did not. I was 16. I was afraid of my father. I was afraid of my whole family. I told myself I would do it when I was older, when I was safer, when it would do some good. I kept telling myself that. For 50 years I kept telling myself that. And then a young man walked into my office at the county courthouse and put $15 on my desk and said his name was Caleb Ainsworth. And I knew it was time. She looked at Walter. "Walter, your grandfather had May Ainsworth burned. He intended only to destroy the workshop. The fire was an act of intimidation. But May was inside, and she was a child, and she was nearly killed, and your grandfather hid it. And our family's built itself on that hiding for 50 years. I'm sorry, Walter. I should have told you when you were small. I should have told everyone." She turned to me. She looked me in the eye. She did not look away. "Caleb Ainsworth, my family destroyed your family. I have no right to ask your forgiveness. I am not asking for it. I am only telling the truth. Today, finally. Before God and this board and this town. Your grandmother and her sisters deserve better. From me, from my father, from this whole town. They deserve better. She set the envelope down on the podium. She did not look at Walter again. She walked back to her seat in the back of the room. She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not cry. I did. I cried so hard I could not see. Dr. Webb called the vote. It was unanimous, 5-0. The auction sale was upheld. The petition to vacate was denied. The land was mine. There was, and I am not making this up, there was applause. Applause. In a county board hearing room. Walter Pemberton stood up. He buttoned his sport coat. He did not say anything. He walked out of the room without looking at anyone. His lawyer scrambled to follow him. The room emptied slowly. People came up to me. They shook my hand. They patted my shoulder. Winifred Hatcher hugged me with her cane bumping against my back. Greta cried. Bernie did not cry, but his eyes were red. Hollis put both her hands on my face and looked at me and said, Caleb. 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 That was all she said. Caleb. Like my name was something she had been waiting 50 years to say out loud. I will tell you what happened to Walter Pemberton, briefly. The envelope Margaret left on the podium was turned over to the State Attorney General's office. A reopened investigation followed. The arson case was, at this point, beyond the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution. The men who had set the fire were dead. But the intimidation of me, the burned lumber, the threatening note that was prosecutable, Walter had not personally set the fire. Walter had not personally written the note. But the man Walter hired to do it eventually talked. He talked because Walter had stopped paying him. Walter was charged. Walter pled out. Walter avoided prison, but lost a substantial portion of his business assets in a civil settlement that funded at the recommendation of the state a scholarship in the names of Eleanor, Beatrice, Florence, and May Ainsworth. The scholarship pays for vocational training, welding, plumbing, carpentry, for young women in Indiana. Walter Pemberton sold his big house outside town and moved to Florida. I do not think about him often. 6 months later, it is spring in Briar Hollow. I am standing in the doorway of a small, one-room house I built with my own hands. The roof does not leak. The walls are insulated. There is a wood stove. There is a kitchen. There is a small bathroom Hector and his church youth group put in over a long weekend that nearly killed Hector. There is a sleeping loft above the kitchen. Honey is in front of the wood stove. She has gotten fatter. The limp is gone. Her paw is healed clean. She has appointed herself the official greeter of every person who comes through the gate, and she takes the job very seriously. Outside on the foundation of the old water tower, is the workshop. We finished it 2 weeks ago, wide open on 3 sides. Steel beams reclaimed from the rubble of the tower, welded into a frame by a man named Ramon, who showed up one Saturday with a welder and a truck, and said, I heard you needed steel done, and would not tell me who sent him. A corrugated metal roof, a long workbench down the south wall, a pegboard with tools, a coffee maker, a sign over the door hand-painted by Bernie that reads, Ainsworth Workshop, Est, 2026. We teach what we were taught. We give what we were given. Below the sign, smaller letters, free to all, always. It is a Saturday in May. Bernie is teaching a beginner carpentry class. There are 12 students, 8 are kids, 4 are adults. One of the kids is the daughter of Walter Pemberton's accountant, which I will not pretend I am not quietly delighted by. Margaret comes every Sunday afternoon. She brings cookies. She tells stories. She has slowly, over 6 months, become a fixture at the workshop. She knew my grandmother. She knew May. She has remembered things, small things, that no one else can tell me. The way May used to braid her hair. The way Florence laughed. The way Eleanor smiled at her once across a bakery counter when she was a crying 16-year-old girl and gave her a handkerchief with a rose embroidered on it. A handkerchief with a rose embroidered on it. I have not told Margaret that I carry that same handkerchief in my back pocket every day. I am saving it. I will tell her, but not yet. It is late afternoon. The class is winding down. Bernie is showing a 12-year-old how to use a chisel properly. Hollis is laughing at something Doris said. Winifred Hatcher is sitting in a folding chair with a piece of pie on a paper plate, supervising. I am at the workbench, sharpening a hand plane. I see her before anyone else does. A girl. 17, maybe 18. She is standing at the gate. She is wearing a hooded sweatshirt that is 2 sizes too big. She is holding a backpack against her chest like it is the only thing keeping her upright. Her sneakers are coming apart at the toes. She does not come in. She just stands at the gate, looking. I know that look. God, I know that look. I set down the hand plane. I walk to the gate. Honey trots beside me. The girl flinches a little when I get close. Not a lot, just a little. The way you flinch when you have learned that strangers are usually a problem. I stop a few feet from her. I do not crowd. Say, he. She does not say anything. I'm Caleb. She does not say anything. You hungry? She blinks. That gets her. The question gets her. She swallows. She nods. Just once. There's soup inside, I say. There's a bed in the back room. It's small, but it's clean. The shower works. The hot water is hot. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to explain anything. You don't have to stay. You can eat the soup and walk away. But the soup's hot now. She stares at me. She stares at me for a long time. I see her trying to find the catch. There is always a catch. She has lived long enough to know there is always a catch. Why? She finally says. Her voice is small. I take the handkerchief out of my back pocket. You hold it up. The pink thread. The faded rose. Because my grandmother stitched this when I was 7, I say. And she told me that kindness is not a thing you keep. It is a thing you pass on. And I am passing it on to you. Because you walked here. Because you are hungry. Because somebody did this for me once. And the only thing they asked was that I do it for the next one. You are the next one. She looks at the handkerchief. She looks at the workshop behind me. The people, the pie, Honey wagging her tail at the gate. She looks at me. Her eyes fill. She doesn't let the tears fall. Not yet. What's your name? I ask. Juniper. Hello, Juniper. Most people call me June. Hello, June. She takes a small step forward. Then another. Then she is through the gate. Honey leans against her leg. June puts her hand down slowly, not sure, and rests it on Honey's head. Honey closes her eyes. The whole world keeps spinning. The whole world keeps doing whatever it does. But on a half-acre in Briar Hollow, Indiana, on a Saturday in May, in front of a workshop named after 4 sisters who had been written out of history 50 years ago and were now being written back in, a girl with nothing came through the gate, and a young man with everything held out a hand. That night, after June was settled in the back room, after she had eaten 2 bowls of soup and taken a 40-minute shower and fallen asleep in clean sheets, I sat on the foundation. I had the journal in my lap. I had my grandmother's pen. I opened to the blank page after her last entry. I wrote, Grandma, I came home. I did not run. I stayed. And tonight, there is a girl asleep in the back room. Her name is June. She has nothing. She had nothing this morning, and now she has a bed. And tomorrow she will have whatever she needs. You would have loved her, Grandma. I know you would have. The workshop is full. The town is here. Margaret is going to teach a quilting class on Tuesdays. Bernie has 8 students. Hollis brings lunch on Wednesdays. Honey has gained 6 pounds. The wildflowers are coming up along the fence. I think about Beatrice and Florence and May every day. I think about Howard too, the grandfather I never got to meet. I am going to put a stone for him next to yours. I am going to find May's grave this summer. I am going to take June with me. I am going to put roses on all 4 of them, including yours. I am going to tell them what happened. I think they will be glad. Grandma, I am 22 years old. I have a home. I have a dog. I have a town. I have a girl in the back room who is safe tonight because somebody loved me before I existed. Thank you. Thank you for the bricks. Thank you for the bonds. Thank you for the chamber. Thank you for the handkerchief. Thank you for the rose. Thank you for not letting them erase you. I am not going to let them erase you either. Your sweet boy, Gulib. I closed the journal. I set it on the workbench. I sat on the foundation, in the cool spring dark. Above me, the stars came out, the same stars that had come out on the first night I slept on this land. The same stars Eleanor and Beatrice and Florence and May had slept under in 1974 when they first arrived in Briar Hollow, with $78 and a contract and 4 pairs of hands. The same stars that would come out tomorrow. And the day after, Honey came out of the house. She lay down beside me. She put her head on my boot. In the back room of the small house, June was sleeping. In Hollis's hardware store across town, the photograph of 4 women in coveralls hung on the wall. In a cemetery in Ohio, 4 sisters were buried near a father who had taught them everything, and a husband who had stood by one of them until the day his weak heart gave out. And on a half-acre in Indiana, on a foundation that had been waiting half a century, a workshop hummed quietly with the leftover warmth of a Saturday full of people. Home, I thought, is not the place you are born. Home is the place you stop running. I had stopped running. And the rose, the pink thread, the faded handkerchief. It was finally home. The end.